It's Ash from Super Videos back for another video for The Walking Dead's TV series. The topic of this video is, what if Negan wanted to turn Abraham into a savior? So obviously that story arc happened with Daryl Dixon. Negan captured Daryl, took him hostage, took him back to the sanctuary and tried to turn him into a savior. And we obviously know how that turned out. But in terms of Abraham, now the topic of this video comes from someone who commented on one of my videos, Ronnie Thomas. They said, hey, I have a question. What would happen if Negan did not kill Abraham, but instead of Daryl, Negan would have taken Abraham? Do you think this is interesting to see more Negan and Abraham? Negan trying to make Abraham a savior. So that's where the topic of this video comes from, and I actually think it's a very interesting topic. Now, right off the bat, no pun intended, I don't think that a scenario like this would actually happen. Because, in my opinion, like I've said previously in my previous videos, I think Negan came to the lineup with a plan. He wanted to see who was the most intimidating, who was the toughest, who was the strongest, who was the biggest person in that lineup. Someone who might cause problems for Negan later on. And even during his speech, Negan was actually, in his mind, trying to figure out who he wants to kill. The first option obviously would be to kill Rick, the leader of the group. But like Negan said in the comic book, he didn't want to kill the leader. He didn't want to make him a martyr. So because of that, I think, just like the comics, Negan in the TV show stayed away from killing Rick. So the next best option would have been some large character. And I think both Abraham and Eugene are pretty big, pretty strong. So I think for Negan, Eugene and Abraham, because of how big they were both in Negan's radar. But I think for Eugene, mainly because he was captured first and he was crying and everything, and he seemed like he was actually scared, that made Negan not think of him as a threat and believe that he would be able to take care of Eugene later on. But for Abraham had this stare, and he was basically saying, come at me, and accepting his fate. He was saying that if you're going to choose me, just choose me. I'm ready for it. And that's why Negan was afraid. He was afraid that Abraham would cause problems. He's obviously big. He is obviously not threatened by anybody. He's obviously not scared of anybody. So that made Negan realize that perhaps Abraham would be the best candidate to get the Lucille treatment. And obviously that's the way Negan went. So that being said, if we leave that out and assume that Negan didn't come with a plan and he ended up choosing someone else, would he have wanted to turn Abraham into a savior? Would he wanted to have gone that route? Now, there's also some problems with that. So it's arguable, but I think the biggest reason why Negan chose to take Daryl and try to turn him into a savior was because Daryl punched him. So that made Negan see that Daryl was not scared of anybody. He was not taking shit from anyone, that he was the toughest son of a bitch out of all of the people in that group or in the lineup. So because of that, I think Negan chose to take Daryl and try to turn him into a savior from that moment on. He saw something in Daryl that wanted him to turn Daryl into a savior. But in my opinion, knowing what type of character Abraham was, knowing about how calm he was during that scene, I don't think that there would ever be a scenario where Abraham would get up like that and punch Negan and risk the lives of everybody in the line. So that's another part that we have to take into consideration. I don't think that Abraham would have done something like that. And because of that, I don't think Negan would have basically taken or decided to take Abraham and try to turn him into a savior. But again, putting that aside as well, let's assume that Abraham was taken by Negan. I don't think that Negan would have been able to turn Abraham into a savior. Obviously, Negan wasn't able to turn Daryl into a savior either, but I think it would have been even more difficult. I think for Abraham, he would probably do what Daryl did, not say I'm Negan, and stick to his guns and basically not kneel in front of Negan. But I think there would have been a part of Abraham that wanted to protect everybody else. And because of that, I think we may have seen a scenario where Abraham was playing along, but not necessarily being a full-time savior or anything like that. But at the same time, I think Abraham would have tried to look for any chance he could find to get back at Negan. He would probably not do something very risky, but I think that that would always be at the back of his mind. The same thing happened to Daryl. He was always trying to escape. But I think for Abraham, he would have been more smart about it, and he would have probably had a more complex and thought out plan than Daryl did. Obviously, Abraham was in the military, so I think that would have become useful. I think he would have used that to his advantage and used kind of the skill set that he would have gained in the military to get out of this scenario. But like I said, I don't think Negan would have been successful in turning Abraham into a savior. But I think for Negan, Abraham would be a very good savior because, again, he was calm, he wasn't scared, he wasn't threatened, he's big, he's strong. So I think he has all of the qualities that Negan would want in one of his saviors to have. So I definitely think that Negan would want to turn Abraham into a savior, but I think that he would have seen him as too much of a threat to want to risk it and try to turn him into a savior. And even if he did, I don't think that he would have been successful. But I want to know your opinions about this subject. What do you think would have happened if Negan wanted to turn Abraham into a savior? That's it for this video. See you next time for another super video.